Hey, everybody. Welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 363, being recorded on August 19th, 2015. I'm Ryan Shrout.
Oh, shoot. I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Alan Malentano.
You're the second in line this time, Josh. Second in line.
Second in line, but I'm still sucking the second in line part.
Yeah, you can see I'm in a remote location, far, far away.
You're with Sebastian, right?
Yeah, I was where Sebastian used to be, but we sent him home. This is my new home now. I'm actually at the Intel Developer Forum in San Francisco, and so my audio and video will sound differently. And I'm going to often look not at the camera because the camera is a nod spot on this particular laptop. But we have a limited time with me. I hope you guys will be able to make it without me for the rest of the show. But we're gonna dive into some of the stuff from IDF, and then I'm gonna go get in a car, not on a car, to get on a plane, but I guess also in a plane.
You know, it'd be really cool if you could like hold onto the hood and they'd swerve through traffic.
We'll see about that.
Hey, money for that.
So anyway, PC Perspective Podcast, website PCPer.com. If this is your first time with us, PCPer.com/podcast is where you can find all the back episodes, download the MP3s, the RSS files, video embeds, all that stuff. And if you want to, you can actually sign up for a mailing list that we let you know when we record the show. We do stream the show while we record it at PCPer.com/live. You can go to PCPer.com/subscribe. Add your name and email address to our short mailing list that all we use it for is to send you notifications about when we do live streams, whether it be this podcast or interviews with other people that happen to come into the office or something along those lines. So,
well, now that you installed Win 10 on that machine, you're also sending everything to Microsoft. So they've got all your email addresses, and every time we send you something.
You mean them, not us, right? Like, I'm not sending it.
Sure.
I just looked at the wrong place on the screen again. Anyway, so let's get into the stuff that happened. I think the biggest story that came out this week is the release of Ashes of the Singularity, which is, I guess, not the release of the game. The game is not out yet, but they did release a DX12 benchmark prototype. So this is what they call a pre-beta. They don't call it an alpha, but they call it a pre-beta. This is it's a game developed by Stardock, with an engine developed by Oxide, and the engine is called Nitrous. And if maybe you're not familiar with it, you might have heard the name before. This is an engine that was originally implementing Mantle, and it was one of two really early examples that AMD had. Battlefield Frostbite engine was the other one, and this one were like the ones that would go to the events and things and have talks, and the developers would go up there and talk about the benefits of low-level APIs. And what's interesting about their game is that it is an RTS, and it's a kind of a massive scale real-time strategy game that kind of makes sense for the benefits you hear about for DirectX 12, where low-level APIs can benefit you by allowing for more efficient use of the CPU, allowing for more draw calls. If you have lots of units, thousands of units on screen, you're going to have thousands and tens of thousands of draw calls at the same time to really draw and pretty up those units on the screen. So it made sense. Now, when DirectX 12 was announced and Mantle has kind of fallen by the wayside, we've got Vulkan and DX12, we started talking with the Oxide guys about what were the plans for DirectX 12. They were going to port it to it, and that's kind of where we're at now. In a partnership with Microsoft and Stardock and Oxide, they wanted to be the first ones out the door with a DX12 benchmark. So that's where we were at here. They let us get a hold of it for a few days early, and we got to look at what the performance characteristics were for a handful of processors, a couple of GPUs across a couple of resolutions and a couple of image quality presets, and then 2 different APIs. So a total of like 80 different data points. Now, I don't want to walk through every single benchmark result that we actually took, but what I think is important to take away is kind of the general synopsis. So we tested the 5960X 8-core processor. We tested the new Skylake 6700K, a quad-core processor, just the Core i3-4330, which is a 2-core processor. Then we tested 2 AMD CPUs, the FX8370, which is 8 cores, 4 modules, and this FX6300, which is a 6-core 3-module part. So we got a bunch of different price ranges and a bunch of different kind of like platform considerations to take into account there. And the data that comes back from this benchmark is really in depth. Like, they're not just giving you an average frame rate. They give you an average frame rate and average frame times, and then they give it to you broken down by, so it's a 180-second benchmark about. And there's a third of it that is called a normal workload, a third of it is a medium, and a third of it is a heavy workload. And those indicate the amount of draw calls that you get kind of categorized, right? So the heavy sections are 20 plus thousand draw calls per second. Medium is 10 to 20, and anything under 10,000 draw calls per second is considered like a normal workload. So they break it down in that way. And then they also actually break down and give you individual scenes, a bunch of frame time data telling you if it's a CPU that's a bottleneck or the GPU that's a bottleneck at any given time. They actually present a whole lot of data that in our limited time, 2 days or so with the benchmark, we didn't really get a chance to dive into, like the frame times, individual frame time plotting and that stuff. But what we did do is we compared the average frame rates for the whole 880 seconds worth of testing. And then we also focused on the heavy results, because that is the one that the developers kind of pointed us towards would be more indicative of total DirectX 12 performance in the long term. Like, if you're trying to push DirectX 12, in other words, what would you get? So the results were interesting, right? So on the high-end processors, and as far as GPUs, we looked at GTX 980 and an R9 290X. If you look at the GPUs, with the high-end CPUs, the GTX 980 saw very little scaling, and actually several times like reverse scaling by small margins. Right?
Negative scaling.
Yes, negative scaling, if you will. So like dropping from 57 frames per second to 50 frames per second, right? At 1080p high is an example of that. And as you went down the processor stack for them, like if you go down to 6700K, you get very similar results. If you go down to the Core i3, you see that DirectX 12 is always faster, but it's by a fairly small margin. And as you go to the AMD processors, you see the same thing. With the Radeon R9 390X, that their gains are much larger across the board, going from DX11 to DX12, and much more consistent. Even with the Core i7 5960X at the high end, AMD gained a huge amount of performance. So, you know, there's kind of two ways to take it out. So, like, if you look at the AMD with the 5960X, you jump from like 43 to 78 frames per second, right? So a huge amount. But what's interesting is if you look at it two ways, right? One is if you look at just DX11 versus DX11, the AMD frame rates are significantly lower than the NVIDIA frame rates. So the kind of takeaway there is that the DX11 implementation on NVIDIA and GeForce drivers is significantly ahead of what AMD has. If you look at DX12, it has pretty much evened the playing field between those two products, the 390X and the GTX 980, which are not exactly the same price, which is interesting too. So the question is, did AMD do a lot more work to their DX12 drivers to improve this much? Did NVIDIA do no work to their DX12 drivers to improve not very much? Or is it that DX12 just kind of homogenizes everything and makes it more like it's on the developer and the game engine to take advantage of these things? And so because of that, the performance on DX12 is going to be very similar between these two GPUs. Which is what we saw. We just don't really know what the core is yet, like what the reasoning is. If we go back and we look at some more GPUs, maybe we'll get a better idea of why all this was happening. But it's pretty interesting to look at. And there's a ton of data in this story for you to kind of glance through. Like I said, 80 different data points between the processors, CPUs, resolutions, and presets and APIs. Josh, did you have any thoughts on this from what it looks like?
It is going to be so engine dependent with the architecture. So say, for example, Grid Autosport. This is a product that Intel had actually helped kind of pay for development and graphics implementation. Took the place of NVIDIA's the way it meant to be played, and AMD's gaming evolved.
Yeah.
So if we look at like the AMD results versus NVIDIA on that, we see like AMD running at 80 frames per second and NVIDIA at 117, and that's at like 1080p. Not a big deal. You think, okay, those are perfectly fine results, except that NVIDIA seems to like this particular game better. And we probably can look at this and say, in its base DX11 implementation, it may do some, what do you call it? Just the way it renders may be more applicable to NVIDIA's rendering pipeline. And so it does it a little bit faster. Just as we saw with Bitcoin mining, with AMD parts versus NVIDIA, and AMD did certain operations faster, and you were able to, mine Bitcoin as NVIDIA. And with the DX11, it just kind of seems that this engine can do a few things faster on the NVIDIA. But then we look at DX12. And because this was a Mantle part, I'm wondering if they didn't work a lot closely with AMD to develop this and get the basis of DX12 with their experience with Mantle, so that on AMD parts, it becomes a lot more competitive with what NVIDIA has. And certainly in a couple of points, NVIDIA takes a couple of steps back, but it's not dramatic. It's not like killing performance. So you would expect to see, they got a DirectX 12 implementation, and they're going this much faster. I'm pretty sure that, I don't know for sure, but NVIDIA probably did not have as much development time with this build as what AMD had. And also, the basis of this, of course, is Mantle, and so AMD had a lot of experience with not just their drivers, but the developer itself working at a low level that is more conducive to AMD parts. Did that make any sense at all, or am I just babbling?
Yeah, the issue is, from what I've been told, is that NVIDIA had like over a year with the source code to this game. Now, obviously, the source code has been changing and things have been optimized, but it's never been anything NVIDIA has ever fallen back on, right? So there was a little bit of controversy with this release where NVIDIA came out like the day before all the results were posted and said, hey, we don't really think this is an accurate representation performance, and there's this big MSAA bug, and so we think you should wait for other tests before determining DX12 performance. And that's a pretty cruddy statement, right? Because it is a real game and it is a real engine, and from what we've been talking with the developer, that like it is a pretty close representation of how the final game will ship. And this has been turned around many times before, where AMD comes around and says, hey, you shouldn't test with the new Batman game because it heavily favors NVIDIA, or you shouldn't test with Project Cars because it heavily favors NVIDIA. And in those cases, NVIDIA says, well, you got to do the work, right? They say, you got to, if it just because they're or we're optimizing for that game and you're not, doesn't mean that we're the bad guy here. And I think that exactly applies this way as well. Just because the developer or AMD is doing a better job of optimizing for this game and NVIDIA did not for whatever reason, doesn't make it an invalid test. It is a game, but it is only a single game, which is true, right? So there will be other DX12 titles and benchmarks to come out before the end of the year that may tell different stories, or they may tell the same story. And that will give us a better idea of if this is a systemic issue with NVIDIA's current setup or AMD's advantage, or if it is more of a hey, this is going to be similar to DX11, case-by-case basis, that type of stuff. But it's really interesting data, and based on the traffic that this story has gotten, it's been something people are very, very interested in.
Yeah,
for sure.
Anybody else have something else to say before I jump in?
Go for it.
I kind of wonder, in looking at these results, if AMD has not, in fact, kind of bet the farm on DX12 in terms of software and driver development. I mean, how many releases have we had in the past year from AMD of major? We've had, the Omega in Decembers, like there's plurals. And then some of the first DX12 base drivers and their WinX, 15.7.1s, that I wonder if their software development and driver development guys are really just focusing on kind of the future and saying, you know what, we're competitive enough in this DirectX 11 landscape. Yeah, we could spend 80% of our time to take the top 5 titles out there and improve them by 5% to get a little bit closer to NVIDIA on a lot of these benchmarks, or we could take that and just get a really solid foundation and baseline for DirectX 12, which is going to be our future, and it's going to be everybody's future, especially with Win 10 being free for anybody who has legal copies of 7 and 8.1.
I mean, it's very possible that's what it is. And I hope that's what it is, actually, and that it's not just a happy coincidence that they're ahead on DirectX 12 for now with this title, right? We've always said that AMD's driver team is behind what NVIDIA's team does, and I think if you look at the DX11 results,
that's
see
because the guys are like a quarter funded from what NVIDIA is.
I get it. I'm not saying they're less smart or anything like that, but they just don't have the size of the personnel to really do it up in the way that NVIDIA does. So it's possible that they just decided to invest everything in DX12 and plan for the future as opposed to trying to build for the last couple of years. But I also don't think that NVIDIA is going to just let this one go, right? If they do have significantly more resources and personnel, then I don't know how long it's going to take them to catch up and what happens then, right, for AMD. Did they plan enough ahead in the future, I guess?
It's nice to see a little bit of parity here that we haven't, been seeing or lacking as of late.
Yeah, I agree. Let's jump into, again, because of my time constraint, a couple of things that I saw at IDF this year. I guess the one thing I'm going to talk about really is kind of the reveal of architectural information about Skylake Processor finally. And I'm going to be honest with you and be upfront, there's not a whole lot that was talked about. There's some. It seems odd, right? For Haswell, I would come to IDF and we'd go to multiple sessions and we'd have lots of individual press sessions about let's talk about the architecture and get your questions answered. This time it was very much more a, hey, media, you should come to that public Skylake session and get all the information you need right there. And they didn't seem real interested in talking above that or more in depth, right? And getting more information was a lot like pulling teeth.
So it's kind of like NVIDIA's 6800 series of cards where they had the big LAN thing and invited everybody in for the unveiling, and the press got to sit in the balcony and gather what they needed.
Yeah.
Like foraging for food.
Let's go over this real quick. What the high-level parts are like. So what we know about Skylake now, we talked about the Core i7 6700K already and what it actually is as a consumer part. But now we know a little bit more details about what's coming out, right? So they have a huge scalability where they're going to have 4.5 watt to 91 watt parts that are going to range in package sizes dramatically. And this is the first time they're going to have that big of a range from a single architecture, and it's actually really, really cool. But if you look at the architecture itself, if we look at the core design, there are a handful of changes, but nothing super. No one thing that stands out to change IPC. Right? They've got segment optimization. They've got improved branch predictors, wider instruction buffers, faster prefetch, lower latencies on the execution units. But they didn't really talk about how wide the execution units are, things like that. They have, if you look at the third slide there, the instruction window that's increasing, you get an idea of kind of this slow, incremental, but consistent increase in the out-of-order instruction kind of handling, right? Which is how you improve your instructions per clock, your IPC, right? So you get your out-of-order window is 224 versus where you look at Sandy Bridge, and you look at the integer register file count or the allocation queue and how it's more than doubled in that time frame. Again, no one feature that goes, wow, I can't believe they did that, but enough things that have added up over time that I think it's interesting. The biggest changes came in the interconnect and the memory changes, right? So the interconnect, the ring bus that goes, connects all of the agents through the device, connects each individual CPU port, connects the graphics, connects the memory bus, it connects EDRAM if it's in there. That bandwidth has been essentially doubled internally, which explains a lot of the kind of memory latency, memory bandwidth improvements that we saw in synthetic tests, but didn't really have an explanation for because we didn't know anything about the architecture at the time. So that's actually a positive thing. That's good, and it may actually be more useful when it comes to 8-core designs, 12-core designs when you get into the Xeon, but it still is an interesting thing to talk about for the consumer side. And then for the eDRAM, what we knew as Iris Pro on Broadwell and Haswell, that is going to exist again on Skylake. We don't have exact information on what SKUs are going to be released with it. But it is going to be available in 64 and 128 gig iterations, but they've actually changed it a little bit so that it's a little bit more autonomous, and it actually, the controller for it has moved from the kind of LLC, last level cache, into the system agent so that it will have lower latency communications with the rest of the system, and that enables what do they call it? They call it I don't know, but it's basically like, it's not panel self-refresh, but it is the ability for the display controller to basically read from eDRAM straight to system memory, as opposed to having to go through the processor, and just kind of saving power and making the whole kind of design a little bit more efficient. That's one of many ways that they've done that. The most interesting feature they added is called speed shift. It is a marketing term for the idea of taking control from the operating system and putting it to the processor for changing the P states of the CPU. So the P states, or performance states, are what the operating system sends down to a CPU today that says, hey, be it your highest performance, be it your medium performance, be it your low performance, go to idle. The operating system, like if you ever go to your power settings and you look at hey, I'm gonna have balanced or high performance or low power, those types of things. Those kind of change how the operating system thinks and how it sends the power commands down to the processor. With this version, with speed shift, it actually takes that away from the operating system and it handles it all on the CPU. It kind of looks at, okay, what's the load look like? What's the requests? What do the requests look like? And I'm going to handle all the shifting between this. The benefit is those transitions are now about 30 times faster going between those P states, which won't have a dramatic effect on like any sustained benchmark, like your Cinebench scores or your media encoding timeframes aren't going to change. But what does change is snappiness, right? So on a low power part, like one of the low power 4.5 to 15 watt CPUs, like the touchscreen should be able to react quicker, as it is able to jump up in frequency faster than it could when the operating system had to recognize that there was a input being detected, determine that it was long enough that it needed to change its frequency, send the command down to the hardware to change frequency, and then actually change the frequency. Now it can happen much more directly. The complication with this is that only works with Windows 10, and it doesn't even work with Windows 10 today. They haven't implemented that into the operating system, and it will be. Intel won't say when it's coming. Just you should ask Microsoft about that. I hate those types of responses. But no plans for Windows 8.1 support or Windows 7, and they're kind of working with the Linux community to see what they can get up and running. For legacy operating systems, it basically reacts in the previous way that it would, right? It kind of lets the operating system control it. This chip also adds an integrated image signal processing unit, which is unique to an Intel CPU for the first time. It's something you see on Qualcomm SoCs, ARM SoCs quite frequently, but now that Intel's heavily into tablets and small form factor devices, maybe even phones still with this type of architecture, that integrating an ISP on there allows them to do some interesting things for face recognition or low power resolution, high resolution captures, that type of stuff. So I mean, that's kind of a high level overview. There's a couple of other things that you guys can go pick out and read through the Skylake Architecture piece that I posted up. But there's still a lot of stuff that we don't know yet. I'm sure some other people that are here covering IDF will get more information about that and post it up, and we'll talk about it in the coming weeks. But it's pretty interesting stuff. And then we also have a piece that looks at the Skylake Gen 9 graphics. I don't need to go over any of this really. I would just say that it looks faster. The 6700K has a 24 execution unit configuration, and apparently they're going to offer up to 72 execution unit options. I don't know where that's going to show up at, but that would be a significant jump over where they were at last year. So, or with the last generation, I guess. So,
Hey,
Josh,
that layout makes a whole lot more sense than some of the previous ones. The die shot.
Yeah.
Up top, you mean?
Yeah, that one.
You mean just because of the weight of how much graphics stuff is in there?
Well, yeah, and especially the shared last level cache. I mean, obviously, you're going to have communication in between that and the system agent and memory. So, yeah, that seems to okay. Look at that. It was what the last one was like 4 cores all together in a long rectangle, and you had the system agent on one side, and then you had the graphics on 4, and so this just makes the traces a little bit more manageable when you're talking ring bus and last level cache than what they had before. But that's just my layman's opinion. I don't have a double E. But you can't spell
I don't either.
beer without a double E.
I mean, it looks interesting. Obviously, one thing that we're hoping to see is like a desktop SKU with 128 megs of the EDRAM on it, right? Because it can have some interesting implications when it comes to compute stuff, not just in graphics, right? So it's, yes, less useful for a desktop consumer to have a 128 meg EDRAM because you're not going to use integrated graphics. But if you're using it for compute, and it can have some impact on performance based on our benchmarks that we did, even with that, the Broadwell version of it, the 5775C, I guess is what it is. That I hope we see something like that. My inclination, based on conversations I've had here, is that we will not see that, at least not initially. So hopefully that changes as well. I guess, I'm kind of glossing over it because of time constraints here, but you guys should definitely go check out the Skylake Processor Architecture Overview and the ASUS Singularity test, because both of those were the things I did this week. And before we get into the things that Alan and Josh did this week,
I'd like to point out that, in fact, I did not get anything up this week.
He couldn't get it up.
Couldn't get it up, huh?
No, I went to Colorado too many times this week, and
well, before we get into the rest of the stuff and I depart the podcast where it becomes the Alan and Josh and Ken show, I do want to thank today's podcast sponsor. That's right, everybody. This episode of the PC Perspective podcast is brought to you by Casper. We're welcoming Casper back into the fold of the PC Perspective podcast. They are an online retailer of premium mattresses at a fraction of the cost. They are
you just said welcome to the fold, and isn't that ironic because you cover it with sheets?
Yeah.
Clever.
Fold. Actually, more ironically, the mattress came to me folded.
Yep.
Right? Casper is revolutionizing the mattress industry by cutting the cost of dealing with resellers and showrooms and passing the savings on to you. One of the ways that they do that is they actually ship the mattress to your door, which sounds crazy. If you've ever moved a mattress, if you've got a king-size mattress and you're moving from an apartment to a house or something like that, you think, how are you going to ship that? That is like the biggest, bulkiest thing you have to do. Their mattresses are made out of a combination of 3 different materials. One of them is kind of memory foam and kind of a synthetic latex, I guess, and it comes in a box that weighs about 110 pounds for the one that I got, and it shows up on your doorstep, and you go, oh, okay, and you and a friend, because it is kind of heavy and dense, move it upstairs, and you open it up, and it kind of poof expands in the room. That's why they encourage you to open it up in the room you're going to be using it. It's not a violent expansion of a mattress, but it is a rather fast expansion of a mattress. It's 2 technologies, latex and memory foam come together for better nights and brighter days. It's a comfortable mattress, actually, and I can say this with some reliability now that I am a Casper mattress owner. My wife and I got one right in time to have a new baby, so it seems like a good time to maybe try to get some better sleep. We're going to have less sleep, so the better the sleep can be. That's probably a good thing, I guess, for us, right? You can buy it easily online. It's completely risk-free. This is the best part of it. You can try sleeping on a Casper mattress for 100 days and decide if you want to keep it, right? So they ship it to you, and if after 99 days, you decide that you don't like it and you want to go back to your old mattress, or you're going to try something else, you can absolutely do that. You can return it, no cost to you at all. But
that's kind of a crapshoot with my sample, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do we really want to accept this mattress back from Josh Walrath?
Well, here's the thing. I do have a secret for you. They're not going to resell the mattress that you slept on for 99 days. They will either recycle it or donate it to a local shelter that allows for those types of things. So you don't have to worry about buying a previously used by Josh mattress necessarily. Which is really one of our biggest fears when buying a mattress, just as a nation.
Or a selling point.
If you look at it, listen, if you want to know if it was Josh's mattress, you just hit it with a UV light, and if it says Josh was here, then
that would be a very specific way to tell that that's the case. So, by the way, all Casper mattresses made in the USA. So here's the call to action. Here's where you guys can do this. You can get a Casper mattress for $500 for a twin, $950 for a king size mattress. If you compare that to industry averages, that's an outstanding price point. And you can save an additional $50 for our audience members if you go to casper.com/PCPer and enter the promo code PCPer. Casper.com/PCPer, promo code PCPer. And we thank Casper for their support of the PC Perspective podcast and for the support on my back and for that support as well. So thank them. Thank you guys very much for that support. So this is the part where I casually say that I have to go get my bags from the hotel and go to the airport to take a red-eye flight home. So
you casually save all of our ears from the popping that's been happening for the past 20 minutes?
Yes.
Unless I remove it in post, then it hasn't happened at all.
That might be really hard to remove in post.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
We didn't have any of that when we did our test call today.
Well, of course not.
I know.
Just
of course not.
In production.
Yeah.
Of course not. Of course not. So, but you guys, everybody else should stay tuned because we're going to talk about a bunch of NVMe crap from IDF.
Yeah.
Some Flash Media Summit stuff from IDF, and Intel maybe getting into the variable refresh monitor support. And I don't have a pick. My pick is going to be
Red Eyes.
No, it's going to be USB Type-C thumbsticks.
Do you have a motherboard that supports that yet?
Type A.
Yes, we do.
Oh.
I mean, who do you think we are, Josh? Come on. Tech.com?
Obviously not the second-class operation I am.
Correct. All right. That's it for me, guys. Thank you. Thank you to the three of you for covering for me. And I can't wait to listen to the rest of this podcast tomorrow afternoon when I get home. And you can see I will still be overseeing the podcast from a distance, just in a very stationary, non-moving fashion. Okay. Bye, guys.
Good night. He's suddenly very quiet.
He's still oddly. Yes, I was just enjoying the non-annoying.
Quiet.
Enjoy the silence.
Enjoy the silence. It's kind of intimidating there. I have just Ryan's poster child self just staring over at me. Anyway, so yeah, I guess we're kind of working backwards. So we're going to talk about IDF SSD stuff. And then I guess we'll work backwards and talk about Flash Memory Summit SSD stuff. But it all kind of blends together because there was stuff at one that wasn't at the other and vice versa. So we might as well just mash it all up.
But hey, it's all storage, so...
Yeah, it's all storage, so I'm just going to go on a non-clicky Alan Malventano marathon here for a little while. In the cover term, or the marketing term for Intel's Crosspoint, which was itself a marketing term, kind of, or just the name of a memory. Well, they're going to put that memory in devices that are going to fall under the Optane name, not with a C, with a P. So it's basically Crosspoint flash memory, not flash memory. Man, I got to get out of that habit. Crosspoint memory inside of devices, and it goes really fast. So they had like a prototype PCIe NVMe device, just showing a comparison of those results with those results of a P3700, which is a very fast NVMe PCIe SSD, which we've reviewed in the past. And And they're showing basically 5 times the random performance at a queue depth of 8, which is like a, kind of a typical queue depth for like workloads. And then they're showing what I think is even more significant is a 7 times performance increase at a queue depth of 1. And the reason that that is much more significant in this case is that if you can increase the random performance to that level, like to a 7 times increase, in other words, you're doing over 76,000 IOPS, queue depth 1 means you're only giving the SSD, you're giving it no heads up. You're getting a response, you're asking for the next request. Like you're sending the next request for,
this is what I want now.
Yeah, I want this one. And then as soon as that one comes back, oh, I want this one. Like imagine if your spouse was trying to go shopping and instead of giving her the list, which would be like a queue, you just told her, could you go buy me some eggs? And then when she got back, I need some pickles. Could you go get some pickles? And then when she, so that's basically queue depth 1, right? But just kind of like in shopping.
Are you teaching data structures now?
It's kind of, no, but this is why it's so significant. If your wife was able to go back and forth to the store at like light speed, you almost don't even need the queue, right? You don't even need the list because the turnaround is so quick. And that's kind of the territory you get into here. In other words, if you had this Optane SSD in the same system as compared to like a P3700 and similar systems doing similar kind of workloads, chances are the Optane part is going to run a lot closer to queue depth of 1, right? Because if you have the same software, it has the same amount of requests going to the SSD per second. This thing is just going to be able to push through, like even if there is kind of a queue, it's just going to blow through the requests so quickly that the queue is very quickly going to just shallow right back down to like just queue depth of 1, which is awesome, right? That's
yeah, but what if they say in the instructions that if you go to a nearby grocery store and buy some bread, also if they have eggs, buy 6, will the stuff bring back 6 loaves of bread?
I don't know. It all depends on if they include Intel engineer humor into the firmware. So,
I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably wrong. Does that mean if it can do 76,000 IOs at queue depth 1 read,
yeah,
that it will always be doing at least 76,000 IOs?
No.
Okay.
Like, in other words, the chances are it's going to turn around so quickly that the system will be the delay between the IOs.
Okay.
Like, if you have a system that has to do something with the IOs, for example, like, not just something that's turning around like a web server, but if you have like a database or something that's actually crunching data, like anything that you would normally be waiting on the SSD on. In other words, the P3700 that's only able to service those at a rate of 10,000 per second.
The fastest SSD we've ever tested.
The fastest SSD we've ever tested, basically. It's only able to do that at around 10,000. So if you have, say, some piece of software that's just grabs one piece of information off of storage, does something with it, and then, say, puts it back, and then it can't do other things ahead. It has to just do that in a sequential fashion, right? This Crosspoint-based SSD is going to remove any time you were waiting on storage would be reduced to 1/7 of that time, basically. So it depends on the application and how long it's doing math versus how long it's waiting on storage, but this is really pushing a lot closer to like the speed of RAM. To the point where you might be able to just code things, like if you could have things that handle huge data sets, and you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of RAM in that system that's handling a large data set. You could start shifting to just having this very large capacity, relatively, solid state drive that's just able to, just point the database or whatever that software is straight at this device, as opposed to using RAM for it and needing like really high demands on RAM. And since we don't have exact prices, but we know that these parts are going to be much cheaper, I would imagine, than RAM. The quote I've got was in between the price of DRAM and NAND flash memory. But since the first like prototype-ish kind of part we're seeing is not like a hybrid of NAND and Crosspoint, it is just, we're just going to make something that's all Crosspoint, I'm inclined to think that the cost per gig is just going to be much closer to NAND flash than it is to DRAM for this stuff. Only going on kind of the hint of, like how they're designing this thing. You want one of these?
Hey, you got to pay for that R&D first.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
The crazy part is, like, if it's within, let's say it's $5 per gig when it launches, and
okay,
what'd the X25M launch at?
That was
round there.
It was like $600-700 for 80 gig.
Yeah, so
it was around there. Yeah.
But the thing here is, what's anyone else gonna do? Like, I don't know. What's any other manufacturer? What are they gonna do?
They're gonna start trying to like make phase change work for them, for whatever their phase change kind of ish technology is.
It just seems like so crazy far ahead, and maybe it isn't, but
yeah, I mean, this is really good, and it's really exciting for storage stuff.
How does it compare to B4?
Oh, you want to jump to? Oh wait, I haven't written anything on that yet.
You have not.
No.
Do you want to broach that, or
we have to
later?
We can kind of. There's something from Flash Memory Summit that was XOR. That was actually more. It was Flash. It was not this. But it's just like a faster type of NOR Flash. NOR Flash is the stuff that's in the BIOS of your computer that takes forever to update your firmware on. And like, there was a company at Flash Memory Summit that's pushing a faster version of that. But I hate to say it, stuff like Crosspoint is kind of going to eat their lunch too, I think. Or at a minimum, it's going to be on par with it. But I really think it's just going to eat its lunch.
Further along.
I mean, it has Intel and Micron behind it, so that's just, two 800-pound gorillas.
So like, is it Intel and Micron in the same IMFT sort of joint venture? Okay.
They're doing it.
So we could potentially see this sold to other people.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Because it'd be an interesting thing if Intel just kept them to themselves and completely cornered the market.
With my understanding of this architecture of this like, the only complication would be that you would need to make your controllers simpler. Because it's you can random write to it. Like I think it's addressable like to a word or double word. Like that's your basically, you're just talking like 16 or 32 bits. You can just randomly write to it. Like that's way less than a sector, right? Could you imagine like you could theoretically have one of these devices and just do random single sector. Like we usually do random 4K. That's what you hear about. Single sector is half of a K. So take the typical thing that we use for our benchmarking, divide it into an eighth of that, and then you could randomly access this, and it should be like no different as far as the latency or any of that. When you try to do this with NAND, you try to random write to it. NAND has to do this musical chair thing with Flash, where like it has to erase blocks, and it can only erase like an 8 or a 6 megabyte block at a time. So if you try to randomly do 4K writes to it for any,
you got to have some cache involved, and then you've got to have some error correction, and
you got to have cache, you got to have error correction. I imagine Crosspoint will probably.
And what happens if power goes out and you're erasing something, and you got to have bigger capacitors?
Yeah. And I mean, you might still see some kind of capacitance, stuff like that on like a Crosspoint SSD, but not to protect nearly as much of it as like on a NAND based SSD. You're not going to have huge, chunks of metadata for wear leveling and like all this other stuff, and like just block management for Flash.
How did they handle wear handling with this?
With Crosspoint, they haven't gotten into any of it, but since the endurance is so much higher than Flash, they might not even care.
It's probably still just a bit of over-provisioning.
There might be a very small amount of over-provisioning. Like this is much closer to RAM, and you don't have over-provisioning in RAM.
Yeah.
So it's really there will probably be some very small amount of it, like probably more like what you see on like a hard drive, which is just like 1% or something worth of just extra sectors kind of set off to the side just in case, right? So that the capacity doesn't have to shrink below what's being visible in case something does, you do get some bad whatever the I don't even know if they'll be called blocks for this. I mean, it is possible, right? And there will be some kind of probably much lighter error correction in place, just to make sure the equivalent of like ECC for DRAM, probably.
Yeah.
Well, really,
we didn't mention 6 or 7 bits per 64 bits or whatever that is.
Probably something like that. Yeah.
We didn't mention the other application they announced for Optane.
Which one was that?
They announced that they will be shipping DIMMs for Xeon systems with Optane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did.
So when are they going to come out with butane?
So the DIMMs for Xeon thing is basically it's following the NVDIMM, probably following the NVDIMM spec, which is just a way to make it so that you can have non-volatile storage on DIMM format plugged into, and it's been for servers, and of course, like Ken just said, they're announcing it for Xeons. That's great because it's been kind of like this kind of a niche thing before for some servers, and like some manufacturers are trying to come and like pull around, huddle around this standard and everything. But if you have Intel getting behind it and saying, hey, we're going to launch this product and we're going to like certify it for Xeon systems and stuff like that, that means, you're just going to get a lot more support for the NVDIMM thing. And I think that this technology will take much more advantage of NVDIMM because now you have like the bandwidth that you would get like over the bus that the RAM is speaking to the CPU over, except you're just talking to, in this case, like Crosspoint dies instead of RAM dies. And Crosspoint is fast enough to where you could probably just execute straight out of it.
And not volatile.
And it's non-volatile. I've said this to a few people earlier this week that have been asking about like, what does this stuff really mean and everything. And the simple thing I say is, if this stuff came out like 10 years ago or 15 years ago or something, like your computer would not be architected the same. The software and the hardware would be very, very different, right? Like when you updated Windows, it would just update part of its image that's just kind of like laying in the Crosspoint memory. And then when you want to start it back up, like it wouldn't even really have to boot or just go through any kind of a procedure. It would just start executing straight out of the Crosspoint. Like not even like opening a hibernation file. It would just basically just start running right back out of that again. Right? It would just pick up where it left off and basically be not just like instant on where it's within like a second or two, but like you just like hit the button and it's just the screen comes back and that's it. Like you're just up and where you were before. Yeah, but since it's come out now and not 10 or 15 years ago, we're gonna have to wait for some of these changes.
Just when we think storage is getting boring, they suck us back in.
It's not getting boring.
Us back in.
Not getting boring with this. So a couple of days ago, or was that yesterday? I think it was yesterday. They're all kind of blurring already. Kingston had a NVMe PCIe SSD at IDF. We're still talking about IDF stuff, not Flash Memory Summit. And they showed, basically a pretty decent performance, 236,000 IOs per second out of, I'm assuming, PCIe by 4 controller of some sort. And we weren't sure what it was until Ryan caught this picture almost a couple minutes ago, of the front of the prototype board. And then I went back through my Flash Memory Summit pictures and compared that to this picture. Looks kind of the same. Like the exact same thing. Turns out that was at the Phison booth, and that is the Phison 5007 TAC E7 controller, which probably everybody's just going to start calling the E7, just like how we've referred to the Phison S10 SATA controller in the past. So that's all we know for now, right? We just know that Kingston has a prototype that's based on that controller, and that's good, right? It just means like that part's going to start circulating out there, and you're going to have more NVMe PCIe SSDs. So
Speaking of
which, look, it's another PCIe NVMe SSD. This time from OCZ, which is going to be called the RevoDrive 400. And so what you're looking at is basically the same kind of deal we've seen with like Plexter PCIe SSDs and some other manufacturers. They basically make the part in the M.2 form factor, and then when you want to make a half height, half length, basically add-in card for your system, they just make a spiffy looking adapter board, and they just basically, put the M.2 part on there and sell it as a, PCIe card for systems that don't have the M.2 port. Since it's pretty easy, you're just connecting 4 sets PCIe lanes to the system bus. And other details we know, Ryan said he was told November. I'm hoping that this will be coming out in November. And all the parts should be Toshiba. So same thing OCs has been doing since they got acquired by Toshiba. So you have you're going to have a Toshiba controller coupled with Toshiba flash. Put it in an SSD that's firmware tuned for consumer, and OCZ is basically the consumer arm of Toshiba now from the looks of their past few releases. So that was another PCIe NVMe SSD. Now let's jump over to Flash Memory Summit. Which brings me to the first thing, at least first thing in our rundown. This was pretty cool. I saw these guys last year, and they didn't have parts that were like complete yet, or complete enough to where you think you might be able to just buy them retail. And I think they're getting pretty close. These guys were companies called Novachips. They were tailoring more towards like military and embedded and like that sort of thing for their storage as far as what they were saying last year. This year they seem to be branching out a little more mainstream towards the end of having a SATA part, for example. But the trick to what Novachips does, and it's visible in the first picture on this article here, is that they have a technology that lets them put a bunch of dies within a package. That's only part A, but part B is having a controller be able to talk to that many dies. There's kind of a limit on how many dies a controller can really communicate with. It's kind of like a fan-out thing, or just there's other physical and logical limits to what you can do there as far as how many dies per channel of a controller. Well, Samsung, last week you guys heard Samsung had a 16 terabyte, and actually theirs was a SAS SSD, and meanwhile Novachips actually had a 16 terabyte SATA SSD. Might take you quite a while to fill it over SATA, but it was there, and it was within
that might be able to handle my Steam game drive
for now.
Yeah.
So the trick to getting this much data, or this many dies connected to one controller, and in turn giving you that much like storage capacity, is, let's see, here's like conventional SSD, right? You have a certain number of channels, certain number of dies per channel, and then you have the Novachips stuff, which if you look here, usually a chip package would just be like inside of a chip package where you had flash memory dies stacked. It would look like what's on the right side here, just that stack of dies inside the packaging. This is what the package looks like before they encase it in the black plastic that you usually see. The Novachips has this extra little controller in there on the side, and it acts as an interface between the flash and then a different communication method in order to talk back to the controller. And what that communication method is a ring bus, which is actually Ryan was kind of touching on with the Skylake stuff, and like that's what CPUs use internally to be able to communicate data between the cores. You're basically trying to have a lot of things sharing one common bus, and ring bus is a good way to do that, just in practice. Novachips decided to apply that to flash memory. Just the trick is that they have to package the flash memory themselves to be able to do this. But you're talking about 800 to 1600 megabyte per second per ring. So obviously the ring is not the limit on the bandwidth there. And with the way the flash memory dies work, typically the controller just kind of like sends a small chunk of data to one specific die, and then there's a buffer on the die, and then the die actually does the work as far as actually writing to the flash, and it does that while the controller could be off doing something else, sending data to another die. So you can really scale these things quite high without any other kind of adverse effects. You just need, the ring, which is what they added. And they did have this guy on display, which they actually also had on display last year, which made my jaw drop. And that's a double-sided PCB, by the way. Yeah,
that's a lot of flash.
That's a lot of flash, and I'm pretty sure all of those were like 16 stack. I mean, they were just like, how much could we possibly throw on a PCB? So that's a full height, full length, but just with
How
an
much
ungodly.
storage is that?
I actually forgot the number, but it was a large number.
Too big for you to remember.
I think it just broke my brain or something, and I just couldn't remember it. Another cool comparison between last year and this year, just from on the how you develop like a part kind of thing. This was FPGA connected to flash, so you have like these two what look like PCIe cards are actually just like cards full of flash memory. And then they had this huge system with like a compact flash card that was actually the programming for the FPGA, and it would basically, this thing would boot up and it would load the code to emulate the controller as they were going to before they produced it basically as an ASIC. And then that was last year, and then this year there's a couple of boards with just this tiny little chip there instead of a whole bunch of stuff, and that was basically just the controller. And then forward a little bit more, and there's the controller on an actual board, actual PCIe card just running. So that was their NVMe development process, basically. So just interesting to be able to see the guts of something like that in like the 3 different stages of development. And yeah, they had like SATA parts, like 4 terabyte SATA SSD and a 7mm enclosure. Like that's the most I've seen in that size enclosure anywhere, even including Samsung, because they have yet to make like an 850 or 860 Evo in 4 terabyte capacity. They can do it, just they haven't just produced the part yet. And these guys are doing it, and they're doing it with smaller capacity per die because they can stack more of them, basically. So, all pretty cool stuff from the Novachips guys. Next up, we're almost there. Almost. Silicon Motion SM2260 controller. All right, so Silicon Motion made the 2246. We've reviewed many of those SSDs that they had on their wall that had that controller in them. But now there is a 2260 coming, and it is PCIe, and go figure, it's NVMe. Like you didn't see that coming. And it's available in M.2, and they also were showing a SATA Express form factor, which kind of seems like a waste of the controller because SATA Express is only 2 lanes of PCIe. But, they're just demoing, hey, look, we can make it in this form factor. We don't know if anybody's going to actually use it in this form factor, but here it is. The specs look, on par with other competing NVMe PCIe parts. So again, this is just like we're just waiting for this stuff to come out, because as soon as all this stuff comes out, you're going to see less compatibility issues, like oddball issues with like motherboard NVMe booting and OS support and stuff like that. They're not really going to have a choice but to fix it, because you're going to have all these parts out there. That's enough storage stuff for now. I'm going to take a break.
Thank the Lord.
Yes. So what's this Intel adaptive sync thing there, Josh?
Well, apparently, it's a lot cheaper to actually use infrastructure that's already there and adapt it for your own use in certain scenarios. Basically, what AMD kind of did for FreeSync with some of their own software tuning. Certainly not what NVIDIA did with G-Sync, but it looks like Intel is jumping on the bus because, hey, adaptive sync is already there, and there's some work that already went on, and it's something that people like, and it's something that is kind of needed in terms of gaming. Because I'm sitting here between 3 60 hertz monitors that don't have FreeSync or G-Sync, and gaming can sometimes become a little chugaholic at the resolutions that I'm sitting at. So it's nice to see that Intel said, you know what, here's a solution to a problem. We can implement it for essentially free because it's part of the spec. And away they go.
I wonder how far back they'll be able to go on their CPUs, or they could just implement this in their driver and just... Like, I wonder how...
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I wonder how flexible their
well, it's obviously it's got to be a DP 1.2a compliant output.
Sure.
and so you'll have to look up which of their CPUs actually support that specification.
The way Scott at Tech Report, who was the original source for this story, was talking, he said sources close to the situation said that even Skylake might not be able to support it. Like, it might be the next revision. Like, Skylake might not be fully compliant.
And that would make sense because originally Adaptive Sync was on a lot of mobile parts, and not every mobile part actually worked with that. So, say several years ago, Intel looked, hey, we can get X amount of savings if we did this, but we'd have to redesign a part. It's already a couple of years down the pipeline. Do we want to do that? And probably they came back and said, no, it's not worth a damn. But then G-Sync and FreeSync is now the next new turf battle for displays. And Intel wants to get that. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if their parts did not support 0.2a in that scenario.
It'd be cool to see a VRR technology roll out and we not have to see a new wave of monitors. Like, this would work with all the FreeSync monitors.
That's true.
So that'd be nice.
That's true.
We wouldn't have to keep waiting for monitors to come out from either side.
This might push NVIDIA to make whatever their next version of G-Sync also support FreeSync output. It's possible.
Maybe. The amount of people gaming on Intel GPUs is pretty low.
It's true,
but it'd be a cool feature to have.
There's lots of games that Intel GPUs can handle though that a lot of people play though. There are games
not only
that are light.
But every year they go up in performance pretty significantly.
True.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of get away with WoW on Intel integrated now, can't you? With Skylake at least.
Yeah, and then certainly Dota 2. And
Dota 2
Heroes of the Storm.
Yeah, but you don't need VRR for Dota 2 because it maxes out integrated graphics.
Yeah, Dota 2 just pegs it anyway. So I mean that's cool. Oh, hey, wait, I wasn't done with storage.
Oh,
sorry.
Thank God.
Oh, well, this one's quick. So we've tested Western Digital red 6 terabyte. We've tested a green 6 terabyte. The only thing that was missing was the black and the red Pro to be made all the way up to 6 terabyte, and now they are. So that's a thing. They upped the cache to 128 meg, which I think was the same amount that was on the other 6 terabyte models.
And what, for a spinning drive, it's doing some 210 megabyte per second?
Yeah, 214 meg per second. Realize that's not across the whole drive. That's only at the beginning. But if it starts off that high, it probably tapers to probably around 100.
Probably 140, considering how my 4 terabyte Toshiba does.
Oh, okay. Well, then...
Yeah, it never gets below, I think, 110 in that one. It's 170 to 110. But anyway.
Yeah. So it just depends on how they orient the tracks in the drive. But yeah, I mean, really quick for a drive. And but I would say if you're going to use the black or the red Pro, those are 7,200 RPM drives with a lot of platters in them, and they're not helium filled. So
backup.
No, not backup so much. Well, if you don't plan on having a fan blowing across them, back up.
They're going to get a little warm.
Yeah, they will get warm. They will cook. But honestly, even if you put a green in a case with no airflow, it'll eventually start cooking. You just got a hunk of metal with an amount of wattage just being pumped into it. So it's got to go somewhere. It's just going to start radiating heat eventually, unless you're, cooling it actively somehow. All right, enough of the storage. Lian Li and ASUS ROG combine Wonder Twin powers.
Activate.
And create a Mini-ITX.
Rhombus.
What? What is it?
They create a rhombus.
Oh, well, yes, it is a rhombus.
Go back to your 8th grade geometry.
I feel like I'm playing Battlezone. It is a cool looking case.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of Battlezone, what was that Arctic Fox? Is that one? The late 80s tank game in our Antarctica that you're fighting the aliens?
Stellar 7?
No, I think it's actually Arctic Fox.
I don't know. Maybe.
But anyway, yeah. You had big rhomboids on skis chasing you with cannons.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So, let's see what they did here. Mini-ITX, Lian Li case. It's nice. Yeah. It's pretty.
Yeah,
spiffy
it's
looking case.
ROG branded. It's Lian Lee, so the design is interesting. It can handle water cooling. If you want to scroll up, you can see it's an interesting external solution with posts. So you mount it on all the posts, and you got the fans in there, and the tubes go through those two back, and you've got a water-cooled solution that kind of has an industrial flavor to it. I don't know if you want to lick it, but I imagine because it's easily accessible, some people will.
That also would make the all-in-one radiator a lot easier to install to the case, so you can just take off that panel and bolt it down instead of having to hold it up there to the top of the case and screw in from the other side.
Yeah.
As long as the hoses
four
are
hands.
As long as the hoses are spaced like that way.
That's a pretty big cutout.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's definitely cool looking.
It's neat.
All right, sweet. Wait, how much is it? No.
I don't think they've said.
We don't know. They haven't said. No, darn.
Money, no whammy.
Okay. Let's see. What's next? Oh, well, we're done with the news and the reviews. So
Because it's over an hour.
it's over
And
an
I'm
hour.
glad we are.
And then we get to skip Ryan because he's not here. And then...
Well, you could, because his pick is a supersonic private jet for less than 10 cents a gigabyte.
He did say he was flying in first class. He got upgraded, so screw
Well,
him.
Oh, all right.
Because he'll get there, 30 feet faster than the people in economy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the 1%.
Because distance is time in this kind of place.
Man.
I see.
Time is a flat circle.
Okay. My head exploded. Josh,
Me.
you got a pick of the week?
Okay, so I've had this Corsair case for a long time, and they had this issue with their 200 millimeter fans in that they just didn't last, and they sound really bad pretty quickly, and you start thinking you're in the mafia the way you're talking about it because you're so frustrated
Okay.
with the sound coming out of the computer, and so I jimmied one of these Thermaltake 200 millimeter fans in there, and I wasn't able to install my second drive bay, but that's okay because I didn't need my second drive bay because Corsair decided to make a 200 millimeter fan that was not standard size.
Oh.
But you know what? For $14, it's worth it. My computer's quiet. My wife is not complaining about that. But
$14 for a 200 millimeter fan? That might make a
Yeah, I think on my 650T, the front intake's the 200 millimeter, and it's a terrible fan. It's a terrible fan.
Yeah.
And
I was just thinking this might make a cool looking desk fan. Like just,
yeah,
sit on your
blowing
desk.
all over you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right.
$14 seems like a worthy upgrade if you have one of those cases with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
With that front intake. Or I guess they
and
were
even
on
the
top
top
on some,
because
yeah.
they've got the top outputs.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
just
going over
terrible.
my hard drives. Yeah, terrible.
Terrible.
Okay, that's
All right. So,
$14. Anybody can afford it except Ken because he's an intern on intern wages.
So I was looking for something the other day to mute my system after a certain amount of time. Like either when the lock screen came up or just some way. Well, in other words, the computer's at the other end of my house. Sometimes I sit down at it and do some stuff, and then I get up and I go off somewhere else, and there's like Facebook still open or something else still open, and then you have just like random sounds coming from the other end of the house, right? Gets kind of annoying. So I was trying to figure out, hey, how the heck do I set this thing to mute? Like some way to do it automatically. And there were a few apps that came out like in the XP time frame that didn't seem to work on a Windows 8.1 install, even though some said they would work with like compatibility mode, but still couldn't get it to work. But I found this thing called System Silencer, which I guess started out meaning to automatically mute things, but then the guy expanded it to add a whole bunch of other stuff. So you can set it to like auto lock, auto shut off your screen, kill specific processes, run specific programs. Like you just basically tell it to do different things at different amounts of time of idle. And it does it pretty intelligently. Like if you use the toggle the mute thing after a certain amount of time, like it will automatically mute after that amount of time, and then as soon as you move your mouse, you can watch it. The little volume thing pops back up on the screen, and it automatically unmutes as soon as you move your mouse. Pretty cool. So it's made by a guy named Nozavi.
Herb. Frank. Tom.
Yeah.
Pat.
So
Face.
so if you want to download this, you might want to just link it right out of the show notes, because if you Google his website, or if you Google System Silencer, System Silencer takes you to a page that doesn't exist on his domain, because I guess he's under maintenance, as indicated on this apps.nozavi.com page, but that's where you can download it from.
Not sketch at all.
It's, yeah. I guess he used to have a nice site, and then...
Here, click this hyperlink and download this exe and run it.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Well, I've run it. It didn't infect stuff, and,
that's always good.
Yeah,
it's
Jared
working.
from Subway originally invested in that website, and went downhill quickly.
All right. Well, that's that, folks. Brian's not here, so I guess we won't have that much of an outro, but I would say, follow us on the Twitters and at PCPers and at Josh.
Well, we could do the introductions, just show Ryan.
Yeah, that's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Do it.
He is right over there. There he is.
Brian Shroud.
Oh,
I didn't get nearly as high as I needed to with
No.
that.
He's not Cartman. Anyway. So,
Respect my authority.
Twitter.com/RyanStrout, Twitter.com/PCPer, Twitter.com/Malventano, Twitter.com/
Josh D. Walrath.
There you go. And then Twitter.com/The Missing Canadian. And
That'd be a pretty good Twitter name.
Yeah, one.
The Missing Canadian. Damn it. Someone's probably going to already snap it up. Oh, well. Ken's working on it.
It's available.
It's available, yeah. Take
Very
it.
nice. Go to it.
PCPer.com/podcast for the show notes and the stuff. And I guess that's it, guys. I might stick around a little bit more afterwards for a few minutes if I want to answer chat questions. I don't know if you're game, Josh.
I can, but I need to take a small break. And I think my dog is behind my computer desk, and I could just shout out here quickly. Damn it, dog. Get out of
hold
there.
on. Let's close the show.